Most people think attraction comes from confidence, from charisma, from being funny, from knowing exactly what to say. But if you pay close attention to social dynamics, something surprising appears. Some of the most attractive people in a room barely talk. They don't dominate conversations. They don't try to impress anyone. Yet somehow, people gravitate toward them. People open up to them quickly, trust them easily, feel strangely comfortable around them. You might even notice something unusual. After talking to them for a while, people often walk away thinking, that person was fascinating. But if you replay the conversation in your mind, you realize something odd. They barely said anything. So why did they feel so interesting? The answer has very little to do with charm, and almost everything to do with psychology. Because one of the most powerful and underrated social skills in the world is listening. To understand why listening is so powerful, we need to start with a simple observation about human behavior. Most people don't actually listen. They wait. They wait for their turn to speak. Think about the last time you were in a conversation. Someone tells a story, and before they even finish, the other person jumps in with their own story. Someone mentions a problem, and immediately, the response becomes advice or comparison or interruption. In many conversations, attention doesn't flow. It competes. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone wants to express themselves, which creates an interesting psychological environment. Because in a world where everyone wants attention, very few people actually give it. Real attention has become rare. And whenever something becomes rare in human society, its value increases dramatically. Scarcity creates attraction. This is why a quiet person who genuinely listens can feel so magnetic, because they are offering something that has quietly become scarce, undivided attention, and the human brain notices that immediately. But listening does something even deeper inside the brain. Modern neuroscience has discovered something fascinating about human conversation. When people talk about themselves, their brain activates reward circuits, areas linked to dopamine release. In other words, talking about ourselves literally feels good. This explains something you've probably experienced many times. Someone starts sharing a story. At first they hesitate, but once they realize you're listening, they begin to open up more. They speak longer. Their tone becomes more animated, because the brain is experiencing a small psychological reward. Now here's the interesting part. The person who allows this to happen, the listener, becomes associated with that positive feeling. We often attribute good feelings to the people who were present when we experience them. So if someone talks to you and feels understood, heard, and psychologically rewarded, their brain quietly links those good feelings to you. Even if you barely spoke, you become the person who made them feel good, and the brain remembers that. This leads to another powerful psychological mechanism: emotional validation. Human beings constantly scan the environment for signals of acceptance and rejection, because historically, belonging meant survival. When someone interrupts you, dismisses your thoughts, or looks distracted while you speak, the brain interprets it as a subtle threat. But when someone truly listens, something very different happens. The brain receives a signal of safety. Your thoughts matter. Your voice matters. You are being acknowledged. And when the brain senses social safety, it relaxes. Trust begins to form. Connection becomes easier. This is why conversations with good listeners often feel calming, even if nothing dramatic was said, because the deeper emotional signal was clear. You were heard. But the power of listening doesn't stop there. There is another subtle psychological effect: curiosity. Human attention is naturally drawn to mystery. When someone talks constantly about themselves, their personality quickly becomes predictable. And once the brain feels it has fully understood something, curiosity begins to fade. But when someone listens more than they speak, their inner world remains partially hidden. Their thoughts remain somewhat mysterious, and the human brain reacts to that uncertainty with curiosity. People begin to wonder, what are they thinking? How do they see the world? What do they really feel? Mystery creates mental engagement, and imagination often amplifies attraction. Sometimes saying less makes people think about you more. This creates what could be called quiet charisma, a presence that doesn't demand attention, but naturally attracts it. Most people associate charisma with loud personalities, confident speakers, people who dominate conversations, but quiet charisma works differently. When someone speaks less, but listens deeply, their presence feels calm, grounded, non-competitive, which creates a subtle form of social authority, because they are not trying to prove anything. They are simply observing, and humans often interpret calm observation as confidence. Another surprising effect of listening is that it allows people to reveal their authentic selves. When someone listens patiently, without interruption, without judgment, something changes. People begin to drop their social masks. They reveal thoughts they usually keep hidden, concerns, dreams, insecurities, because deep listening creates psychological permission to be real. And when someone shows you their real self, a strong emotional bond often forms, not because the listener said something brilliant, but because they created the space where authenticity could appear. This leads to a surprising cognitive reversal. Most people believe that to be interesting, you must constantly produce interesting things to say. But psychology often shows the opposite. The most interesting people in a conversation are often the ones who make others feel interesting. Because people rarely remember exactly what was said. They remember how they felt. Did they feel ignored, judged, interrupted? Or did they feel understood, encouraged, valued? Good listeners create those positive emotional memories, and those memories quietly shape attraction. Because when people recall a conversation where they felt good about themselves, they often associate that feeling with the person who listened. In a noisy world where everyone is trying to be heard, the rare ability to truly listen becomes magnetic. It creates trust, curiosity, connection, and quiet authority. So the next time you meet someone who seems effortlessly attractive in conversation, pay attention to what they are actually doing. They aren't racing to speak. They are listening, carefully, fully. And that single behavior might be one of the most powerful forms of social intelligence a person can have.